Donald Trump confirms that some 2,000 U.S. troops will withdraw from Syria. The U.S. president says they have served their purpose after the so-called Islamic State was defeated. Tensions flare in the Democratic Republic of Congo as opposition candidate Martin Fayulu is blocked from attending a rally in Kinshasa. The presidential campaign has been suspended with major doubts surrounding the planned vote on December 23rd. French police go on strike, demanding better working conditions and back pay for thousands of hours of overtime. Across France, officers only answered emergency calls, and passport control at Charles de Gaulle Airport was slowed down. Hello, and thank you for joining us in the France 24 newsroom. I'm Simon Harding. We start with news from the White House, where President Donald Trump has announced that U.S. ground troops will be pulling out of Syria after the president claimed that this so-called Islamic State group had been defeated. 1,000 troops who have been there mostly in a train and advise capacity will now withdraw, with the Pentagon saying they will now transition into the next phase of the campaign. Catherine Viet has this.
A 180-degree turn on Syrian policy as Donald Trump tweets plans to withdraw U.S. troops from the country.
We have defeated ISIS in Syria, my only reason for being there during the Trump presidency.
The decision will affect about 2,000 U.S. troops who are mostly supporting the Syrian Democratic Forces, an alliance of Kurdish and Arab fighters. Trump's tweet contradicts the official position of the Pentagon and the State Department, which are seeking to retain a U.S. military presence in Syria to ensure the Islamic State group does not rebuild. As recently as October, on a visit to Paris, U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said the U.S. was committed to staying in Syria.
As ISIS has collapsed inward, they've been forced into what is now less than 2% of their original territory that they held. So it's going to still be a tough fight. I don't want anyone to be under any illusions, and we're together in that fight, and we will be successful, but it's still going to take some time.
Even fellow Republicans are voicing their dismay over the decision.
The decision to withdraw an American presence in Syria is a colossal, in my mind, mistake, a grave error that's going to have significant repercussions in the years and months to come.
If this decision is a withdrawal of all of our forces in Syria, now we're dramatically less safe. This is an Obama-like move. Everything I said about withdrawing in Iraq without a residual force came true.
U.S. defense officials are also worried the move could see Russia and Iran gain more influence in the region. The decision, too, leaves Washington's Kurdish allies in the lurch. Turkey has repeatedly clashed with the Kurdish militia, who see it as a potential threat.
Well, for more on this story, our correspondent in Washington, David Smith, explained the Pentagon's reaction to the president's decision, a reaction that wasn't necessarily in line with Donald Trump's.
This is all happening very quickly, some would say abruptly. Just take one example, Senator Lindsey Graham of the Foreign Relations Committee, who normally has Donald Trump's confidence on these matters. He says he was completely blindsided by this move, and he's certainly among those who are critical of it, saying that it is jumping the gun. A Pentagon report suggested well over 10,000 ISIS troops, fighters still operational in Syria, even though their territory has shrunk dramatically during this military campaign. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, they've done a lot of the fighting to clear out these ISIS fighters. This would potentially leave them abandoned and at the potential mercy of Turkey. So in the hours since the president's tweet and a slightly more nuanced statement from Sarah Sanders, there's certainly quite some criticism of this in Washington from defense experts, political opponents, and others who say, once again, it's foreign policy made up on the hoof without really looking into the details of the potential consequences.
Next, more news from Washington. The White House are set to send North Korea aid, a major U-turn in their foreign policy towards Pyongyang following a year of no help. Funds to the isolated totalitarian nation was cut off over Pyongyang's failure to begin nuclear disarmament. But as talks on disarming stall, the US is changing its strategy. Camille Nedelec has this.
The U-turn comes after a year of almost no outside help. The UN sanctions over North Korea's nuclear weapons program had cut off the flow of US aid into the country. But on Wednesday, the United States said that was about to change.
I will be sitting down with American aid groups early in the new year to discuss how we can better ensure the delivery of appropriate assistance, particularly through the course of the coming winter.
The United States was determined not to budge until North Korea disarmed, but its hardball tactic didn't work. Aid organizations had warned of a potential food crisis and souring of relations with Pyongyang over the strict UN sanctions. The sanctions had effectively shut down North Korean aid operations because of blocks on shipping transactions and the entry of US citizens.
American citizen travel to DPRK for purposes of facilitating the delivery of aid and ensuring that monitoring in line with international standards can occur.
Trump's often belligerent rhetoric towards North Korea in 2017, infamously calling Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man, gave way this summer to smiles and handshakes all round as both sides agreed to begin talks on nuclear disarmament. But further talks in November were cancelled and have yet to be rescheduled. It is hoped that in 2019, the renewed influx of aid from the United States may help relations between the two countries.
Uncertainty continues to reign in the Democratic Republic of Congo over whether or not tense elections will be held on Sunday. On Wednesday, the Electoral Commission decided to suspend the presidential campaign. Opposition candidate Martin Fayulu was stopped from holding a rally in the capital, Kinshasa. From there, tensions escalated quickly, as Francois Vibo reports.
Running for office, but barred from campaigning. Martin Fayulu, one of the main opposition candidates vying for the Congolese presidency, was stalled for hours on his way to a rally in the capital.
We arrived in Kinshasa at 3:15 p.m., but we were blocked and couldn't go any further. I was meant to go to Njili, to the Place Sainte-Thérèse, to hold a rally. But Kabila was afraid of seeing 3 million Kinshasans in the streets, the Place Sainte-Thérèse packed with people. So he stopped me from coming.
The governor of Kinshasa suspended all campaign activities in the capital on Wednesday after clashes left 7 dead last week, as well as thousands of ballot boxes destroyed. The governor claims this roadblock is here to filter out extremist militants who were allegedly plotting violence against the police. Up in arms over the ban, hundreds of Fayulu's supporters travelled out from the city centre to join his convoy, but they faced off with armed police, their stones responding to plumes of tear gas.
What's going on is that our president is stuck the other side of that barrier. The police are blocking his way. We don't want disorder. We just came here to welcome our president and to be with him.
Provincial authorities have so far given no end date for the campaign suspension, and the Electoral Commission is even considering postponing next Sunday's vote. The next 4 days are likely to be tense. The Democratic Republic of Congo has never yet known a peaceful transition.
And with more details on what's going on in the DRC, France 24's Thomas Nicolon in Kinshasa says that there are major doubts as to whether or not the election will be able to go ahead as scheduled on December 23rd.
There is tension and confusion in the Democratic Republic of Congo as the presidential election is still due to be held on the 23rd of December. But on Wednesday morning, the governor of Kinshasa ordered a halt in campaigning for security reasons, while opposition leader Martin Fayulu was only a couple of hours away from holding a rally in the capital city. And this led to clashes between Fayulu's supporters and the police. Now, at the Electoral Commission, more and more people are considering postponing the presidential election for maybe just a week, since all the voting machines that are supposed to be used for the vote on the 23rd of December are still not in Kinshasa, as 8,000 machines were destroyed in a fire last week. Now, a spokeswoman at the Electoral Commission still says that the election will take place on the 23rd of December, but there is a press conference that is going to be held at the Electoral Commission on Thursday morning, and we will know more by then.
Thomas Nicolon speaking from Kinshasa, and of course we will be bringing you all the latest from the DRC. Well, with less than 100 days to go until Brexit, and with negotiations between the European Union and Britain hitting a brick wall, the EU are preparing for a no-deal exit from London. It has announced temporary measures which aim to minimise the disruptions that a no-deal scenario would entail, especially in key areas such as finance and transport. The UK, meanwhile, has allocated £2 billion to fund government departments that will be affected by Brexit. And despite these preparations, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said a no-deal situation would be a disaster.
The risks of a disorderly withdrawal of Britain from the European Union are obvious. It will be an absolute disaster. That is why the European Commission is making an effort, member states too, by the way, to prevent this disorderly exit from the EU. But it takes two to put down a decent tango.
Meanwhile, in London, Theresa May has announced that Parliament's vote on Brexit will be held on the 14th of January, over a month after it was initially scheduled and just 10 weeks before Britain's due date to leave Europe. Once again, the Prime Minister came under heavy fire in the House of Commons. Nicholas Rushworth has the details.
We need much less of the cheek and more by way of courtesy in listening to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister.
In a tense session of Parliament, the British Prime Minister Theresa May said debates on her deal would resume after the Christmas break.
We intend to return to the meaningful vote debate in the week commencing 7th of January and hold the vote the following week.
The opposition Labour Party said she was the architect of a constitutional crisis. It has submitted a no-confidence motion in her, a largely symbolic move.
The Prime Minister has cynically run down the clock, trying to manoeuvre Parliament into a choice between two unacceptable outcomes: her deal or no deal.
An increasing number of politicians from all parties believe a new referendum may be the only way forward. May dismisses that out of hand. She remains in power after surviving a confidence vote last week within her own Conservative Party, but is loathed by Brexiteers who think she's tied the UK too closely to the European Union, and by Remainers who see her deal as inferior to staying in the EU. EU leaders insisted last week they could only offer further political and legal assurances on the deadlock issue of the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. No renegotiation was possible, they said.
Here in France, police have staged a nationwide strike asking for better working conditions and back pay for thousands of hours of overtime. The Alliance Police Union called on a work stoppage and go slow day, which saw thousands of officers respond only to emergencies and policemen at Charles de Gaulle Airport to take their time at passport control. Overworked and underappreciated, French police say they've reached a breaking point. Catherine Viette has this.
Their patrol cars remain in the parking lot. Heeding the call of their union, these police officers in Rouen are responding to emergencies only. They say they've had enough.
We've shut the police stations. Instructions were given that police officers will only leave to answer emergency calls, so it's just minimum service.
A revolt by the French police, fed up by budget cuts and working conditions. These images shared by the police union show police stations across France closed as officers protest during a day of anger. At Paris's two main airports, long lines formed at security and passport checks as police took their time reviewing passengers' information.
The goal is to show that the border police must do a very thorough job as required in a state of emergency, and that can cause long lines.
The police union says its officers are exhausted from weeks of clashes with Yellow Vest protesters and angry over unpaid overtime. The government has agreed to give bonuses to officers who've been called up to cover the protests.
The €300 bonus has not only been announced, but even more importantly, it was voted in last night. It's €33 million. It's a bonus which allows us to reward the 111,000 security personnel who were put under tremendous pressure, particularly in the last few weeks.
Police unions say the government needs to do more to address their grievances.
Stay tuned to France 24. More news coming up. Bye-bye.